Hi, everybody. Welcome back at our mini-series on the recommendation of the European Society of Breast Imaging, EUSOBI, of screening of women with dense breast. This is a major topic. There has been published a pivotal white paper by the EUSOBI, and the first author of this paper is Ritse Mann. He's also chairing the scientific committee of our society. And Ritse, thank you very much for being back today to a longer version about this pivotal papers, which has been a tremendous work of yours, team spirit, but also tremendous impact about how we as a whole, as breast imagers, are approaching the field of personalized breast cancer screening. Ritse, what is the most important message of your paper?
There's a few really important messages there, I think. The most important is that we acknowledge that breast density heavily impacts our diagnostic capacity of screening mammography. And as a consequence, we should inform women and we should offer them something better. Right? The something better is what has always been very long the discussion, and also one of the reasons that we did not make this statement, even though we have known that breast density impacts our performance for a very long time. But at first, we didn't have the evidence that we had something better and that we could actually cost effectively offer that. That changed completely with mainly the DENSE trial, where we showed that breast MR really does that. It is far better and it is cost effective. And with that, we believe that it's time to sort of transform the screening landscape. All in the message that we do not well, and in particular subgroups of women, and that we can offer them a better screening strategy is, for me, the most essential, right? Be honest.
This is wonderful, and a wonderful summary of your mission and what you did actually to improve the care for our patient in subgroups we can clearly define and where we can do clearly better. So the method here you used in the recommendation number 1 is MR. So tell me a little bit about your experience, which kind of benefit you as a lead author, but also as a dense trialist, are expecting for women with extremely dense breast if you add MR to their screening routine in your country, which is the Netherlands.
Well, the first and foremost is that we achieve what we call a stage shift, right? We find cancers at a point in time when they're smaller, easier to treat, not lymph node positive. With that, and I think that is quite unique if you look at the data, we are capable of finding cancers at a point in time where they do not impact survival. That means obviously that you get to all the hardships of cancer treatment and so on, but they are a little bit more limited because the cancer is small, you don't need extensive chemo and so on. But also that if it's found, it's treatable and you will be cured and you can go on with your life. To give a person that kind of message, we can do this, we can sort of safeguard you, is a thing that I think is, as a radiologist, one of the best things that we have ever been capable of.
Yes, this is, I think as a radiologist, that's a superb point. I mean, there are few fields in the whole field of radiology, not about breast imaging, they can provide these kind of data that we can really shift the disease stage down just by introducing a new method. And talk about the new method, this is MR. And I know you're heavily involved also in this kind of research, how to implement that, like to set up the new workflow. So people are discussing, okay, it's doing very well. It's obviously the highest possible evidence we reached, but it's going to be like super expensive. So what's your point on that? Is it really more expensive to do MR, or maybe on a long run it might even pay off to invest?
I'm not entirely sure if it will completely pay off. It costs money, right? But all in healthcare is quite expensive. We tend to look at healthcare costs from the perspective of the value of a year in perfect health, right? That's what the quality adjusted life year means. And in therapy, we are willing to spend roughly 80,000 euros a year for one quality-adjusted life year gain. So if one person lives that much longer, we are willing to pay roughly 80,000 euros for that. Now, if you look at cost effectiveness in TENS or in any of the other screening trials with MR, that is roughly in the order of 10 to 15,000 euros per quality-adjusted life year gained. That is really cheap. Also, from a therapeutic viewpoint, it's well below any threshold, which implies that it doesn't come for free, but it is a relatively cheap intervention to improve quality of life for many. And with that in the back of my mind, I think we should stop talking about breast MR as being a very expensive modality. It's really not. On top of that is that most of the screening trials looked at MR screening using conventional protocols, 2 patients an hour, 3 patients read by 1 radiologist in an hour. Honestly, you can easily scan 3 to 4 patients in an hour on 1 MR machine. Since it's screening, as a radiologist, you can evaluate 30 in an hour, right? Not 3 in a day. And that dramatically reduces the cost on top of what we currently already achieve, because we didn't calculate with these kind of interventions, right? We only calculated with the classic breast MR stuff, which means that the actual price is a lot lower still. And I would say that MR has been very long postulated as the high-end third-line imaging modality that is sort of the top of the line in radiology. But honestly, at one point before, that was CT, right? And before that, that was actually mammography. It is no longer. MR is just a working horse, and if we make well use of it, it's not a very expensive working horse either. And it has obviously the advantages over the others, that soft tissue contrast is fantastic. Your contrast is brilliant. There's no ionizing radiation.
Wonderful. This is a super important point. Stressing that the cost of MR has to be approached not only just the price on the label, but also in the context of treatment and the concept of a whole public health system. And if you consider that, you will have to go back to cost-effective analysis. And this will show you, as you nicely said, actually implemented it could be a bargain. If you want to know more about that, please go back to the interview we did the other week with Ruud Pineppel, our EUSOBI president, who will discuss this in more detail. And another point, I just summarized it because there's so much information you gave us. Thank you very much again, Ritse. The point about MR is not the holy grail, which is kind of this super expensive Maserati or Ferrari. It is anywhere in radiology, a kind of a tool which is used everywhere. If you fall from your bike, you're getting in 48 hours an MSK exam. No one asked about that, no problem. No insurance company will say, okay, is it necessary? The same is if you got headache, you get an aneurysm scan. But we still, as breast imagers, are still kind of arguing why a woman with dense breast should become getting a breast scan. This is kind of weird. And there are actually numbers where you're showing the distribution of the MR capacities worldwide, how much percentage of the whole capacities we are really attributing to breast MR. And this is a ridiculous numbers of about 3 to 4%. So this is something I think we should really think about. And this requires team spirit, because even as a trialist of a huge study, you won't change that. You need the community of a huge society. And as a leading society, EUSOBI had started this initiative. And Ritse, let's talk a little bit about that. How setting up people from different countries, different backgrounds, different maybe even opinions together, what you did as a first author to get this recommendation paper into action. What's your point about that?
A very valid question, also because recommending something like this, recommending a real change in screening paradigm and introducing new methods is something that people fear, right? We're talking about many, many women. And as a consequence, this is a huge effect in workload and capacity that you need. And people in general are fearful, right? Fearful for change, fearful for not being capable of delivering what they think should be best, and therefore not willing to state what it is. Within EUSOBI, we had very heavy discussions on this, due to the simple fact that on one hand we have the evidence, and on the other hand we have reality, and those do not completely match up. In the Netherlands, it might be feasible to offer MR screening to women with extremely dense breasts basically from tomorrow, but in many countries that's simply not the case. Question there was mainly, if we are saying this, is if we adopt the evidence that's there, aren't we creating legal issues? Aren't we promising the world to people and then subsequently having to tell them, sorry, this can't happen? I was really surprised to find that people from Eastern Europe were among the strongest and fiercest proponents of this recommendation. In some of these countries, there are no formal screening programs whatsoever. But the statement is quite simple. Within EUSOBI, we stand for offering the best care to our patients. And if we do that and let that argument prevail, then suddenly everyone is aligned. Right? Then all the legal barriers, all the difficulties are out there. And obviously we all realize that to make this happen, things need to change, that we need to work in our local practices to get this further. But there is a very clear and general consensus that the evidence is there, it works, and we should at least say to the people, both our colleagues and the women, that this is the way to go. And eventually that made the whole discussion relatively simple, right? Where we started with all these barriers that everyone faced, we ended up with a clear and mutual understanding that if we really wanted to do something and really wanted to change our care and improve our care, this was the way to go.
Thank you, Ritse. This is, I think, for me, if I may say so, one of the most important parts of the interview, because change is a word like anywhere, like a buzzword, blah, blah, change. But change management is really an art. It's getting people together, and this is what you did. Congratulations to that again. And it always starts with a roadmap, doesn't it? You may later on discuss whether the roadmap has been in its first version the best one, but we have to get people together and put it on the road. Our job as radiologists, I think we agree on that, is not on the public healthcare sort of path. This has to be discussed differently, but we are obliged to summarize the evidence, and that is here, and we have to communicate it. And as you said, you described this as a journey, as an evolving process. Agreed?
Definitely.
And so this won't be the focus, but I think some remarks we already had in the chat, in the discussion last weeks in our social media channels. What would be alternatives, future sort of methods, if you're not able, for instance, to provide MR everywhere? And what's going to be your personal stake at the current state of evidence?
Okay, there's different steps in your question, I guess. Within the paper, we already acknowledged that if you cannot offer breast MR, ultrasound would be a valid alternative, because there's clear evidence from a very large randomized controlled trial in Japan that actually does reduce the interval carcinoma rates in this population, and is sort of available. Honestly, virtually every hospital and even every GP practice in the world has an ultrasound machine. The obvious trick is then to train people to actually use it and to prevent enormous amounts of recall and so on. However, this would be a first step. There are other modalities in place or in the pipeline that have potential role here. One that's very heavily advocated and which might definitely have a role here is contrast-enhanced mammography. Honestly, to me, it is a sort of a simpler version of MR, but also a little bit less good version. But still, I do think that if we figure out how much we lose, right, and how good it actually is, we might eventually say, okay, if you can't offer this, then offer that, and this is the price you pay. If we have that kind of data, I would definitely be hopeful that we can also formulate a clear recommendation for that. Then further back, I think there's a whole bunch of more 3D-based ultrasound-like techniques that are under development that might incorporate things like elastography, ultra-high resolution Doppler, optoacoustics, and so on, that when integrated might eventually offer a functional ultrasound-based, non-contrast enhanced imaging modality that can have sort of the same performance as we currently see from MR at a price that is a lot cheaper. That would be something that is for the future, though. I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Thanks. That's an awesome summary. So there's a lot in the pipeline, but for now we have done our homework and we have to translate these data into action, which is translating the evidence we got into action, and that's MR, period. Right?
Yeah, that's the only thing where the evidence is without any doubt.
Well, the final question, if I may, Ritse, would be about our patients. How should we approach our patient? Because there's a wonderful final statement that is sort of, we have to talk to the patient and not just putting them on a sort of frame and say, okay, here we go, to talk to the patient and personalized sort of decision making. What is that approach going to be in the future?
Yeah, I think that eventually we'll end up with some sort of a screening outpatient clinic, right? Where women come and discuss the possibilities. We have these kind of things for all kinds of questions in life. And this is actually quite vital one. And that might be something that is done by radiologists, might be something that's done by radiologists in cooperation with GPs, for example, or nurse specialists. But I really think it's important. There is no screening modality in the world that doesn't come with problems, right? There is false positive detections, there is a bit of overdiagnosis, and we cannot ignore that. For one woman, that might be a non-issue, but for others, these issues might be big. And therefore, the recommendations from person to person should vary. And obviously, if you're heavily claustrophobic, an MR scan is a nightmare. Then again, if you hate the compression of a mammography machine, I don't think you would like that. So there is this balance in effects that we cannot capture in a black and white recommendation, and that can only come from a decent discussion with our patients, which implies that we should not only inform them that screening might be useful, but also what the downsides are, what the options are, what the alternatives are, and which modalities are actually viable. That's a lot of information to process. This won't be an easy thing to do. But you see, at least from our trials, for example, that women really would like to have that kind of autonomy. And I think we can only support autonomy by educating people well.
Yeah, that's essentially translating personalized medicine into the screening world, right? And talking to the patient. Well, thank you very much again, Ritse, for taking the time today. It was really lovely talking to you. As many of you who are watching us, have read the paper many times, but it's always lovely to talk to the patient who behind it, to see the face, to get it more personal, but also to get more insights. So we went through the interview about the evidence behind the papers. Go to our interviews on our YouTube channel if you're not too familiar with them, and see how the first authors of these papers, DENSE trial, Comstock trial, cost-effective analysis, approach their data. We went through the process of bringing together the EUSOBI family to writing this awesome pivotal recommendation papers. You learned the personal approach of Ritse, how we're going to approach patients in the future and personalized medicine. And I think there's lots of discussion worthwhile to continue, and I'm going to be happy to share these with you. One final question, Ritse. It was lovely talking to you, but I really love the painting behind. Just let us know. This is really awesome. Is it an elephant here or in the back?
Two elephants, I think, right? There's a second one.
Really lovely. That is so,
right?
So nice.
I really violent ones.
This is nice. The colors are so great. I only got blue in the background, so very boring. This is so nice. Making it more personal, more approachable, and more fun to listen to you even more. Thank you very much, Ritse, for being with us on our channels. And you guys, please make sure to follow us on all our channels, YouTube, Insta, LinkedIn, Twitter, you name it. Leave your likes and your comments. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to forward it to Ritse and we're going to answer it. Have a good one. Bye.
Thanks.